Okay, the choice between being and having, that's quite a title, isn't it? It really makes you think.
It does, doesn't it?
So today we're diving deep into the spiritual seek, which, for anyone who hasn't checked it out, it's a great resource for exploring some really interesting philosophical and psychological concepts.
Definitely.
And we're specifically looking at this idea from the psychologist Erich Fromm about these two fundamental modes of existence, having and being. Have you ever thought about, like, the forces that shape how we live our lives, how we relate to other people, even like how we find happiness?
All the time.
That's what we're getting into today. It's not just abstract philosophy. It's actually really relevant to how we experience the world.
Yeah, Fromm's work on this is so fascinating. The way he contrasts those two modes of being, having, and being, it really challenges our assumptions about what a good life actually looks like.
Yeah.
You know?
It does. So right off the bat, this having mode, it seems like the default setting for so many of us, right? It's all about acquisition, possession. It's constantly thinking about what you have, what you could get, or even what you might lose. I don't know about you, but I've definitely felt that pull before. It's almost like you start to measure your worth based on your stuff.
It's deeply ingrained in our culture, especially with capitalism and consumerism. Fromm's view was that in this having mode, your worth is tied to what you own, those status symbols.
Your car, your house, your clothes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And get this, he even applied that idea to relationships.
Really?
Yeah. It's like someone can treat another person as just another thing to possess.
Wow, that's kind of a disturbing thought, isn't it? Reducing someone to a transaction instead of seeing them as a human being.
Exactly. It goes against that whole idea of genuine connection. And that's a stark contrast to the being mode, where the focus is completely different.
So what does the being mode look like?
It's all about experiencing the present moment fully. The connections you have, finding meaning in those experiences, rather than just focusing on material things.
So it's not about chasing after the next shiny object, but about the quality of your experience right now.
Exactly. It's about embracing who you are, nurturing your inner world, and expressing that authentically.
It's about being, not just having.
Exactly.
This whole having mode makes me think about consumerism. It's like a perfect example, right? It's that constant desire for the latest gadget, the newest fashion. I know I fall into that trap sometimes.
Oh, for sure. Consumerism is a prime example of the having mode. It's fueled by this never-ending stream of messages telling us we need more, newer, better. You know how advertising works? They prey on our insecurities, create this feeling of lack, even if we have everything we actually need.
Yeah, it's like they make us feel like we're not enough unless we have that new thing.
Exactly. And they use all sorts of psychological tricks like scarcity or social proof just to make us crave things we might not even need.
It's like a never-ending treadmill. But here's where things get really interesting. The source actually connects consumerism to spirituality.
I know, right? It sounds counterintuitive. But even our spiritual pursuits can get caught up in this having mindset. We can fall into the trap of thinking we need to buy certain products or have certain experiences to reach spiritual fulfillment.
So it's like thinking that having a bunch of crystals is going to make you enlightened.
Exactly. Authentic spirituality goes way deeper than accumulating objects or checking off experiences on a list. It's about cultivating your inner world, inner peace, a sense of purpose, and a deep connection to something greater than yourself. The source even includes these quizzes, these little self-reflection exercises that make you think about your own tendencies towards materialism and superficiality.
I love those. They're a great way to check in with yourself.
Right. So we've talked about how consumerism draws us into that having mode. But what's the big deal? Like, besides maybe ending up broke, what are the real consequences of getting stuck in this mindset?
That's a great question.
There are some pretty serious downsides, both personally and for society as a whole. One thing the source points out is this conflict between consumerism and the idea of discipleship.
So that journey of spiritual growth and development.
Exactly. If you're fixated on acquiring more and more stuff, it's hard to make space for that inner work.
It creates this clash of values.
Right. You can't serve two masters, as they say. And the source also talks about the unethical behavior that can be driven by this consumerist mindset. It's easy to forget the human cost of always wanting more, more, more.
Yeah, it's like we get so caught up in our desire for the next thing that we lose sight of the bigger picture.
Absolutely. Think about something like the fast fashion industry. Those super low prices often come at the expense of exploitative labor practices. People are working in terrible conditions just so we can have cheap clothes. Our desire for the latest trends can have a real impact on other people's lives.
So how do we break free from this cycle? How do we make that shift from having to being? It can feel pretty daunting.
It can.
Yeah.
But Fromm believed it starts with changing our values and our priorities. It's about recognizing that our worth isn't tied to the things we own, cultivating gratitude for what we already have, and finding joy in those simpler, non-material aspects of life. What do you think about that? Doesn't it sound freeing?
Oh, absolutely. And I love this idea from the source about a being-focused spirituality. It's about understanding that our worth is intrinsic, you know? We're all interconnected and we all have a place in this grand scheme of things. It's not about what we possess, but about who we are at our core.
Exactly. That aligns perfectly with Fromm's ideas. And the source also talks about how community plays a huge role in this shift.
In what way?
Think about it. Authentic communities nurture values beyond just materialism. They provide a sense of belonging, a shared purpose. Have you ever experienced that? That feeling of belonging within a community?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's a powerful antidote to that feeling of always needing more, you know?
Right. It's a reminder that we're not alone on this journey.
And one of the most interesting points the source brings up is this idea that being represents our inner world, which they call interiority, and then having is associated with the external world, what they call exteriority.
It's a brilliant way to frame it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we live in a world that's constantly vying for our attention. Advertisements, social media, everyone showcasing their highlight reels. It's a challenge to cultivate that inner stillness and self-awareness that's so essential to the being mode.
It's like this constant tug of war, right?
Yes, between the external world of possessions and status and the internal world of thoughts, feelings, and experiences. It's all about finding that balance.
This is making me really reevaluate my own priorities. It's not just some abstract theory. It's about how we actually live our lives.
It really makes you think. And this choice between being and having is so powerful. It affects everything, our well-being, our relationships, even the world around us.
So why does this all matter? What does it mean for us on a practical level? Why should we even care about this being versus having thing?
On a personal level, it's about finding true happiness. If we're always chasing after things, we'll never be satisfied. But if we prioritize nurturing our inner selves and connecting authentically with others, that's where we find a deeper sense of purpose.
So it's about quality of life, not just accumulating stuff.
Exactly. You can't buy happiness, right? And then if we zoom out to a societal level, imagine if we all shifted from a having focus to a being focus.
What will that look like?
I think we'd see less emphasis on consumption and more on community, sustainability, and social justice. We could create a more equitable world, a world where we value connection and recognize our shared humanity.
That's a powerful vision.
It is. So does that mean to truly embrace being, we all have to get rid of all our stuff and live like monks?
That's a good question. Do we?
Not necessarily. It's not about deprivation. It's about making conscious choices. It's about asking, does this thing I'm about to buy actually add value to my life? Or am I just buying into the hype?
It's about being mindful and intentional with our decisions.
Exactly. It's remembering that true happiness and fulfillment come from within, not from the things we own. It's about finding joy in simple things like quality time with people you care about, being in nature, pursuing your passions. What are some of those things that bring you joy?
Oh, so many things, but I think you hit the nail on the head. It's those simple things, those genuine connections that truly matter.
They really do. So we've talked about this whole being versus having framework. Now let's dive deeper into how these modes of being actually show up in our lives.
I'm ready to go deeper. It's funny, we were just talking about that tug of war between our inner world and the external world. You know, it's like this constant battle almost.
It really is. Like on one side, there's this pressure to accumulate more, keep up with everyone else's image of success. But then there's this longing deep down for something more, something that actually feels meaningful. Have you ever felt that tension?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
It's like you're being bombarded with messages saying, you need this, you need that, you got to have this other thing. And then there's this quieter voice inside that's like, wait, is that stuff actually what matters?
And that's the challenge, isn't it? Trying to cultivate that inner space, that connection with yourself, when there's all these external distractions screaming for your attention. It takes real effort.
It does. You have to be so intentional. It's not just about the stuff we buy, but also the information we take in, the media we consume, even our own thoughts sometimes.
It's true. And, practices like meditation, mindfulness, even something as simple as connecting with nature, they can be so helpful for creating that inner stillness.
I totally agree.
It's like giving yourself permission to just be without the need to constantly do or acquire.
The source made a great point about authentic community, too, and how that can play a role in shifting away from this consumerist mindset.
Right. Because in a true community, in a genuine community, you're valued for who you are, not for what you have. Your worth isn't tied to those external markers of success. Have you ever felt that kind of acceptance within a group?
Absolutely. It's such a breath of fresh air, especially when you're used to those environments where you feel like you're always being judged or compared to others. It's so freeing to just be yourself without pretense.
Exactly. And I think when you're surrounded by people who genuinely value those things, connection, authenticity, supporting each other's growth, the need to accumulate more stuff really starts to fade away.
It does.
You start to see that happiness and fulfillment come from a much deeper place. They come from those relationships and shared experiences.
It's like your whole perspective shifts, right?
Exactly. It's that realization. Your worth isn't tied to the things you own or achieve.
Yeah.
It comes from who you are at your core.
Which is so empowering.
It is. It allows us to break free from that never-ending cycle of wanting more.
So I'm curious, as we're talking about this, how have you personally tried to cultivate this being mode in your own life? What practices or perspectives have been helpful for you?
It's definitely been an ongoing journey for me, with lots of trial and error and experimentation. Personally, I found that practices like yoga and meditation have been incredibly helpful for just calming my mind, allowing me to connect more deeply with myself. And, getting out in nature, even if it's just a walk in the park, it helps me feel grounded and centered. I'm curious, do you have any practices that help you connect with that being mode?
Oh, definitely. Spending time in nature is huge for me, too. It's amazing how being in nature can just quiet all the noise and clutter in my mind. Like I can finally breathe and see things more clearly.
It's powerful. I've also been trying to be more mindful about my consumption habits. Before I buy something, I try to pause and ask myself, do I really need this, or am I just getting swept up in the hype? Will this actually add something valuable to my life, or is it just going to end up as more clutter?
It's that intentionality, right? It's not always easy in a world of instant gratification and nonstop advertising.
Oh, I know. It takes effort. But I think it's crucial for making that shift from having to being. So for someone listening who's thinking, okay, I want to cultivate more of this being in my life, where would you recommend they start?
That's a great question. What advice would you give someone who's just beginning to explore this idea?
I would say start by simply noticing where you're putting your attention.
Mm.
Are you constantly on social media, comparing yourself to others, feeling like you're not enough? Or are you taking time to appreciate the simple joys in your life, connect with the people you love, cultivate a sense of inner peace? Where's your energy going?
It's about being present, right? Not constantly chasing after that next thing. Easier said than done, I know.
I agree. It's definitely a practice, and it's important to be patient and kind with yourself throughout the process. It's a journey, not a destination. There'll be times when you slip back into old patterns. It's okay, it happens to all of us. Just keep gently bringing yourself back to that intention of living from a place of being rather than having.
I love that. Progress over perfection.
Exactly. And remember, even small changes can make a big difference over time. Start with just 1 or 2 new practices that feel good to you. Maybe it's 5 minutes of meditation each morning. Maybe it's a walk in nature after dinner. Maybe it's being more mindful of what you're buying. Experiment, see how it feels, and adjust as you go.
Find what works for you.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all approach here. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. Reach out to a friend, join a community of like-minded people, or find a mentor who can support you on this path. Having that support system can make all the difference. Have you found that to be true in your own life?
Oh, absolutely. We're social creatures, aren't we? And having that sense of connection, knowing you're not alone on this journey, it makes such a difference.
I agree. We can learn and grow so much from each other's experiences. I have to say, this whole conversation has been so insightful and thought-provoking. It's really given me a fresh perspective on this whole being versus having dynamic.
Me too. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but it's definitely given me a lot to think about. So as we move towards wrapping up this part of our deep dive into being versus having, I'm curious to hear, what's your biggest takeaway so far? What's resonating most deeply with you at this point?
I think what's sticking with me most is that reminder about our inherent worth.
Yeah.
It's not something we have to earn or prove. It doesn't depend on what we have, what we achieve, or how we measure up against some external standard. We are all inherently worthy just because we exist.
It's a powerful truth, isn't it?
It really is. So with all this in mind, where do we go from here? How do we actually take all of this knowledge and integrate it into our lives?
That's the question, right? It can feel overwhelming to think about making such a big shift.
It can. But I think it starts with each of us pausing to reflect on what truly matters to us, what brings us genuine joy, what kind of impact do we want to make on the world.
Right, and then aligning our choices with those values.
Exactly. It's shifting that focus from what do I have to who am I being? And I think it's important to remember that we don't have to make drastic changes overnight. Even small, consistent steps can have a huge impact over time. What's one small step you could take today to move towards a more being-centered way of life?
Maybe it's choosing to have a real conversation with a friend or loved one instead of just scrolling through social media, or taking 5 minutes to practice gratitude, or just noticing the simple beauty around us. It's those small, intentional actions that add up over time, I think.
They do. Every time we consciously choose being over having, it creates a ripple effect. It shows others that there's a different way to live, a way that's more fulfilling, more connected, and ultimately more sustainable.
And as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into being versus having, I just want to say thank you so much for this incredible conversation. It's really given me a lot to ponder.
The pleasure was all mine. It's
Yeah.
been fascinating to explore these ideas with you.
So as we leave our listeners with this final thought, imagine a world where being takes center stage, a world where our values reflect our shared humanity, our interconnectedness, and our commitment to creating a better future for everyone. What role will you play in bringing that vision to life? I can just imagine it, you know? A world where we're not constantly bombarded with messages telling us we need more, more, more.
Right, where it's not about keeping up with the Joneses, but about genuine connection and personal growth.
What do you think would happen to our values if being really took center stage?
Oh, I think we'd see a huge shift. We'd move away from that constant competition and start focusing more on cooperation and collaboration. We'd really understand that we're all in this together, you know? Our well-being is all interconnected.
And I bet we'd start to see some real progress on issues like social justice and sustainability.
Oh, definitely. If we're not so caught up in our own individual needs and desires, we can actually start focusing on creating a world that works for everyone.
It makes you wonder, what can we do? I mean, how can each of us play a role in making this happen? It feels like such a big thing.
It can feel overwhelming, that's for sure. But I think it all starts with each of us making small, conscious choices every day. Choices that reflect our values and move us in the direction of being rather than having.
It's like those little ripples, you know? One small action can create a ripple effect that spreads outwards.
Exactly. Like, what's one thing you could do today to embrace a more being-centered way of life?
That's a good question. Maybe I'll skip scrolling through social media tonight and call a friend instead. Or maybe I'll just take a few minutes to really appreciate the sunset. Something simple like that.
I love that. It's those simple things, those moments of presence and connection that can really make a difference.
They really do.
Every time we choose to prioritize being over having, we're sending a message. We're showing others that there's another way to live.
A way that's more fulfilling, more sustainable, and more in tune with who we truly are.
Exactly.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into being versus having, I just want to thank you again for this amazing conversation.
It's been my pleasure. It's been so insightful. I'm really grateful for these conversations.
Me too. And to our listeners, as you go about your day, we invite you to consider this. What would a world look like if we all embraced the power of being? What role will you play in making that vision a reality?